Hello, YouTube. My narrative today will take you back to the times of the ancient Inca Empire and things that very few people in the West have heard. So let me start with Yuri Alexandrovich Zubritzky, who was a Soviet and Russian Latin American scientist, poet, translator, promoter of Indian studies as a Native American, professor, leading researcher of the Institute of Latin America at the Russian Academy of Sciences, honorary doctor of the University of Lima, Peru. He was awarded the Peruvian Order of Distinguished Service. He worked at the Institute of Latin America of the Academy of Sciences, where he headed the sector of the Andean countries. Zubritzky passed away in 2007. He was one of the few, and apparently the first Russian, to master the Inca language, Quechua, and translated into Russian many classic works of Inca and Quechuan literature. Between 1959 and 1972, Zubritzky worked at the Institute of Ethnography of the USSR Academy of Sciences and the so-called People's Friendship University, where in 1970 he brilliantly defended his thesis for the degree of Candidate of Historical Sciences. So thanks to his efforts, Moscow Radio began regular broadcasting in the Quechua language in the 1960s. For 20 years, he headed the broadcasting service in the Indian languages of the Moscow Radio and often appeared on the air. And for many years, Zubritzky hatched the idea of organizing an expedition in search of the city of Paititi, where the Incas supposedly hid their treasures after the conquest of their country by the Spaniards. So what I will present to you today is the report of this Russian scientist about his experience in Latin America in early 1970s. Again, I'm sure this is the first time most of you will hear about this. Zubritzky's story about his adventures in Peru, about the mysterious light he saw above the Inca treasures, about the golden garden of Cuzco, about the gold of the kingdom of Kitu, about the road of gold, about dungeons full of treasures. The ideological and psychological field of South and Central America is so uneven, so replete with bright flashes, black clots, pristine whiteness, the play of all colors and shades, that the colors of the rainbow seem to be too pale a set of tools to convey all this diversity. It seems that mysticism and magic emanate from the very pores of the South American land. Their impact is felt by every foreigner as soon as he enters the borders of Abiyala. That's how he starts and continues. So let him speak. A strange floral fragrance suddenly enveloped me, and for a moment I lost consciousness. The Peruvian engineer Salas, who hurried to my aid, anxiously said "Sorocha." This did not surprise me. I recognized this word, which means the name of the disease of the Andean mountains, which often affects foreigners. Something else surprised me. At the moment when Salas rushed towards me, and I had already regained consciousness, I saw quite clearly how my companion's European clothes has disappeared somewhere. He was wearing a light tunic, intercepted by a white belt studded with magical signs. On his head, a narrow golden hoop decorated with 3 bright feathers of a sacred bird. On his feet, sandals, ocotos, with a gilded weave. In a word, the costume of the ancient Inca. "How are you feeling?" I heard it, but not in Spanish, but in Quechua, the language of the ancient Incas. In surprise, I mumbled something in response in the same language, although in front of me again stood a European dressed and educated in Europe engineer, not an Indian chief. What kind of metamorphosis is this? Unable to find a reasonable explanation, I attributed all this to my post-fainting condition. Of course, I didn't tell Salas himself anything about his reincarnations. He will laugh again, and apparently my fears were in vain. A few years later, one of my Peruvian friends, a doctor by profession, said after listening to my story, yes, maybe it was just a hallucination, and maybe not. In our soul of the Europeanized mestizos, in moments of emotional tension, the Indian ancestor often wakes up and dominates. Something similar probably happened to Salas, and the flow of energy emanating from him at that moment made you, who knows our history, see in the man rushing to your aid an ancient Inca leader. The incident described above occurred at night in April of 1971, about 20 to 25 kilometers from the ancient city of Machu Picchu, discovered in 1911. Due to a number of circumstances, my Peruvian friend and I were forced to walk 50 kilometers on railroad ties lying at random at night. The space between them was littered with pieces of broken stone, its sharp edges cut through the shoes like a razor. It was terribly tiring for us, literally exhausting. We met a lot of strange and unusual things along the way. Bonfire lit by uncivilized, in quotation marks, Indians, from whom at any moment one could expect an arrow filled with curare poison. Streams flowing from inaccessible peaks with water resembling borjomi, that's Caucasian, like in Georgia, mineral water, in taste, but absolutely unsuitable for drinking due to the abundance of pathogenic bacteria. And the Lady of the Mountains, Puma, the narrow gauge railway led us from the valley to valley, from gorge to gorge, and like never before, I felt for myself what microclimate is. One valley was directly adjacent to the Urubamba mountain river, cramped by stone, often broken banks. The river was empty, roared like a 100-headed herd of African elephants, and most importantly, sent a thick and cold, bone-chilling fog into the valley. In another valley, on the contrary, it was stuffy and tropical heat. Urubamba's voice was barely audible, but something was slurping, squelching, grunting, and howling nearby. I couldn't help but think of the truly superhuman octave range of Ima Sumac, a popular Peruvian singer of the 1950s and 1960s. In the third valley, it was raining, and in the fourth, the tongue stuck to the larynx from the hellish dryness. From such frequent and abrupt changes, the last energy leaves you, and you begin to orient yourself poorly, both in direction and in time. And it got really bad when a huge cloud tightly covered the moon. Moving along the railroad ties in complete darkness is a real torment. Suyari, uauke, suyari, kunanla, Salas muttered hurriedly and for some reason in half-whisper in Quechua. Wait, brother, wait, now. And the European-educated man, candidate of technical sciences, raising his hands to the sky, recited an ancient Inca prayer song several times. O the sun, O the moon, luminaries, you are the progenitors of the people. If I walk in the dark, my strength will run out. Don't leave the firmament. The atmosphere of a deep tropical night filled with myth and mystery, was such that I was not at all surprised when a piece of clear sky formed around the moon, which returned to us, albeit pale, but saving light. Mysticism, I could only whisper. But what is it? Ahead of us, a few kilometers away, a light loomed. It's strange, said my companion. There is no village there. And the light was visible more and more clearly. Exhausted by thirst and the first tens of kilometers of the hard journey, I already saw a spacious veranda lined with comfortable armchairs and people sitting in them drinking beer and Coca-Cola. However, as they approached, the images of the veranda, chairs, and people dissipated one by one, but a large illuminated area of space remained. The light seemed to be limited by some invisible barriers. It was enclosed in an invisible room measuring 7 to 8,000 cubic meters, according to a very rough estimate that I am making today. But there was no light source, at least it was invisible. There were 100 or 200 meters between the narrow gauge railway and the border of this light pool closest to us. But it was impossible to walk this distance, and not only because of fatigue, but because of such dense thickets of Peruvian jungle that it would take sharp access and many hours of labor to break through to the light. And was it necessary? And what, after all, is this light? I fixed a questioning gaze on Salas. According to our beliefs, he explained, such a light appears over the places where the Inca treasures are buried. Neither Salas nor I have advanced this topic further. We were so exhausted that we were ready to give all the gold in the world for a sip of fresh water. Both gold and diamonds at that moment were of no interest to us, who were left alone with the sky, mountains, and jungle. We moved on. How I later scolded myself for not bothering, despite my severe physical condition, to mark the point where the air was glowing on the terrain plain the very next day. Everyday worries prevented me from doing this in the following days, months, years, and when a few years later I made this attempt, to my chagrin, it turned out that I had hopelessly forgotten where the point of our journey was located, where the Peruvian land was ready to reveal one of its secrets to us. However, when decades later I shared my grief with an elderly Quechua Indian, he said, "Our land from time to time points to ancient treasure burials, not to be robbed, but to be admired and respected. That is why light appears to people when they are not ready to dig into its depths. And then the person who saw the light loses his memory of where this event took place and often forgets about the event itself. This is our belief. How effective this belief is, I have experienced for myself. Today, I would be able to determine the place of the ancient burial only approximately on a 20 to 25 kilometers section of the road. So for the first time, I touched upon the question of the legendary riches of the ancient Incas. Let me now tell the readers about them. And I will start with the legacy of the Inca Garcilaso, the son of the Spanish conquistador and one of the last Inca Nustas, Vestal princesses of the sun. It is not possible to cite all the passages from the chronicle he wrote in which he talks about Inca treasures. I will quote only a few lines dedicated to this so-called Golden Garden or Golden Fence. It was a square adjacent to the Temple of the Sun in the Inca capital, the city of Cuzco. That fenced-in place, writes the chronicle, in the time of the Incas was a garden of gold, silver, and platinum. It contained many different herbs and flowers made of these metals, small shrubs and large trees, many animals large and small, wild and domestic, snakes, large and small lizards, snails, butterflies, small and large birds, and each thing was located in such a way and in such a place that it looked like it can be more natural. There was also a large field of maize and quinoa cereals, as well as other vegetables and life-size fruit trees made entirely of gold, silver, and platinum. The house had bundles of firewood made of gold, silver, and platinum, and there were large figures of men, women, and children cast from the same metals. They, goldsmith, Zubritzky clarified, made an endless variety of dishes which were kept in the temple, including pots, jugs, small and large vessels. In that house, temple complex, Zubritzky clarified, there was no thing that was used for any need, so that it would not be made of gold, silver, or platinum, including picks and spades. For this reason, with full justification and accuracy, they called the Temple of the Sun and the entire palace Kori Kancha, which means golden quarter. There were similar miracles in other cities of the empire. Where did these untold treasures go? A significant part of them was paid by the Indians for the release of Atahualpa, the only Inca, title of the emperor, Zubritzky clarified, treacherously captured by the Spanish conquistadores. Having received the largest ransom in the history of mankind, the Spaniards, contrary to their promises, executed the supreme ruler of the Incas. And yet the ransom that the Spaniards received was only a small part of the treasure. According to Inca Manco, who led the people's struggle against foreigners, this ransom can be compared to one mango grain, and what the Indians hid with a whole bag of such grains. Where are these riches hidden? It is possible that some of them are buried in the place over which Salas and I happened to see a huge mass of mysteriously glowing air. In the very city of Cuzco, the former capital of the Incas, there is a dungeon, the entrance to which was blocked by thick iron gates several decades ago, and before that, treasure seekers had repeatedly traveled to the dungeon. They went and did not return. However, one of these brave souls returned after a long absence. He brought a golden ear of corn with him, and there was no blood in his face, and no wonder. The strange wound on his left arm explained everything. The unfortunate man, in order not to die of thirst and hunger, drank his own blood and thereby undermined his vitality. After going out into the fresh air, he took several deep breaths and fell dead. Somewhere, in large quantities, is hidden the gold of the kingdom of Kitu, which was part of Tawantineuyo, the four connected cardinal directions, as the Inca Empire was called. Anyway, on the outskirts of the Ecuadorian city of Otavalo, an ancient well-trodden road begins. It is called Curinyan, the way of gold. The road leads into the mountains, and there it branches into many paths, sometimes running in different directions, then intertwining with each other. Somewhere in such an impenetrable jungle, there may be Paititi. But the most real location of most of the Inca treasures is the city of Paititi, lost in the jungle of southeastern Peru. I know of at least 4 cases in which people unexpectedly found themselves in this dead city or in its vicinity, became owners of gold items, and were able to avoid being the target of poison-laced arrows of the Machiganga Indians. The tribe protects the city in accordance with the way the Incas ordered it more than 4.5 centuries ago. What does Paititi look like today, based on the stories of people who visited it but never returned to it? Paititi lies in a deep mountain gorge, overgrown with lush tropical vegetation, but still failed to completely overcome the stone walls of the buildings. You can enter the city from two sides. On the one hand, the remains of a paved road can still be seen in some places, however heavily destroyed first by the Incas themselves and then by shrubs, vines, and trees, tearing out of the ground with irresistible force. Making your way through such a green wall, you risk tearing not only your clothes to shreds, but also your own skin. At the other end of the gorge, a staircase with steps cut into the rock has been preserved. They can also be used to enter or exit the city. At the top, the steps are adjacent to a massive gate made of stone blocks. A golden disc with a diameter of several meters is mounted on the pediment of the gate, depicting the sun with human features and rays radiating in all directions. There's probably only one street in the city, with a square in the center. On and near it, there are about 12 life-sized golden human figures depicting the only Incas emperors who ruled the Tawantinsuyo Inca Empire. The street runs between stone buildings, in the premises of which, as well as next to them, articles made of precious metals, mainly gold, are stacked in some disorder or even just piled up: corn cobs, necklaces, bracelets, vessels. In short, according to Peruvian ethnographer Ruben Iwaki Ordóñez, Paititi is a city that between its cold stone walls holds treasures such as a person cannot even imagine. But the significance of Paititi is not only that it is the keeper of treasures. Its discovery would allow us to find the answer to many mysteries of the history of ancient Abiyala, America, and possibly other continents, for example, Atlantis. The discovery of Paititi would be comparable to the discovery of Troy. So as can be seen from the first part of my story, in 1971, fate, for the first time, brought me almost close to the treasures of the Incas, if you believe the folk signs, and then sent some kind of indifference to them, laziness, apathy, and unforgivable forgetfulness. Not so definitely, or perhaps with a malicious grin. It reminded me of them later in Ecuador, when the Indians showed me the beginning of the path of gold. And again, after an outburst of keen interest, indifference and apathy seized me. But in 1974, quite unexpectedly for myself, I became the owner of interesting, convincing, and perhaps in many ways unique information about the city of Paititi. Such information could not leave me indifferent. An expedition project was drawn up, supported by the heads of two academic institutions, the director of the Institute of Latin America, Professor Volsky, and the director of the Institute of Archaeology, academician Rybakov, as well as the vice president of the USSR Academy of Sciences, academician Ovchinnikov. Alas, bureaucratic tyranny turned out to be stronger than the scientific arguments of my project and the scientific and even administrative authority of the leaders who supported me. The indifference of high-ranking officials forced me, in the end, to abandon plans to search for the enchanted city, a city that harbors untold riches. that have not been found so far. Such is the tale of the Soviet scientist, expert, linguist, who was able to visit South America when he was 48 years old and had amazing adventures. And I will bring you more stories like this from the annals and chronicles and diaries of Soviet and Russian explorers, researchers who have traveled the world. I've done my share. I wish I could do more in the future, explore more countries, see more places like Yucatan in Mexico, like Southern Africa and Mongolia, and much more of interest to me. But this is what I wanted to let you know, and I think it's a fascinating story. And this person had the ability, this scientist, to work in South America, which wasn't an easy task for a Soviet scientist. And I'm not sure who he reported to outside of his scientific community, but it doesn't matter. He was definitely interested in what he observed, and he wrote it down. He was also perturbed by what happened to him and this indifference that has overcome him, and he stated it. If you like my research, please support me through the links you will find in description to this channel, to this video. Please like my videos. Please tell others about my work. Thank you for your attention to my work, and stay tuned for more.